This is an island surrounded by water, big water, ocean water. Trust me, I'm like a smart person. I'm very consistent. I'm a very stable genius. I had the best words. Tolerated. I know words. Mike Pounds. I hope they now go and take a look at the oranges of the investigation. But there's no better word than stupid. Anonymous, really anonymous. I'm very highly educated. One of the wettest we've ever seen from the standpoint of water. Had the best words. God bless the United States.
Around the nation, DYT Nation, Jeff Walter here with you. Welcome to the show. It's Wednesday, so midweek, hump day. Boy, do we have a show. So now we're going to talk, of course, about Mini Tuesday. Is that what we're calling it now? Is it Mini Tuesday or Super Tuesday 2? I don't know. All these Tuesdays are starting to blend together. But hey, we're going to talk about that, what happened, and the bad news and the good news along with it. So, we're going to try to talk about the more positive aspects of what happened and the progressive movement. And so we'll do that. We'll talk about that. Then we're going to also talk about media bias, mainly against Senator Bernie Sanders that we've seen and the implications on that. We'll switch gears and then talk about Donald Trump's newest plan to help with COVID-19 industry. You're going to love it. It's more bailouts for industry. Yes. Then we've got Alex Jones. Haven't heard from him for a while, but you're going to enjoy that story. And then finally, some justice for Harvey Weinstein's victims. So you're going to love that. By the way, reading you guys' comments, which, by the way, you can comment, but your comments, if you become a member, more likely to get read. But nonetheless, if it's a good comment, I like to read it. Jump James says, voting on a Tuesday is stupid. I agree. We should have voting holiday. What'd be interesting is if we actually had everything on one day, all the voting on one day, and then that day is a national voters holiday. Oh, wouldn't that be great? Just get this the whole thing over, or at least if you have to, break it up into 2 days, 25 on one, 25 on the other. The way that we do it is so ridiculously stupid. So you are right about that, Jeff. A lot of stuff that we do, you might have noticed if you don't live in America, a lot of the stuff that we do electorally is really stupid. So, yeah. Anyway, so there's that. Voting with less polling places, as Gokagini points out. Absolutely. Look, I want to share my experience voting, right? Because my experience does not line up with what a lot of college students' experiences is, right? So for me, I never have any problem voting. Never. But I live in a small area. Yes, I do live in a college town, but my precinct is outside of the college town, like, I guess, or outside of the main reach of the campus where most of the students are. And so I go and in my precinct, there's usually a bunch of older people. So, and this is every place that I've lived um, for the last 10 years, probably. The turnout was always very low during primaries and generally skews older. That's just from my experience. It explains why I'm in even a more conservative area, even if it is a college town. I've had that issue. Now, the thing is that since it is a place with low turnout and, it skews older, I've never had any problems voting. I've never really even had to wait in the lines. But there are reports in Michigan where, a lot of college students had gigantic long lines. And so I mean, look, we're busy enough as it is, younger people, right? We got a lot of us don't have time to wait in lines, like even if we want to, right? And so, of course, it's like we plead and stay, guys, stay in line as long as you can. Some people will do that. Most will do that, but some, even if they want to, will not be able to stay in those lines. And so, that should be, let's be honest, long lines should be considered voter suppression. I mean, that's kind of the way that I've always viewed it, but I've never actually said that before. It's like when we talk about long lines in African American areas. That is a tool of voter suppression. They close down polling places, and then they, have in the remaining ones, people having to wait hours upon hours just to be able to vote. That is voter suppression, and that is, I think, a uniquely American problem. I don't know if other countries seem to have the same problem as we do with massively long lines, but it should be considered voter suppression, and we need to really get some international monitors in here. So, yeah. All right. Anyway, so yeah, that's my experience, and it doesn't line up with a lot of other people's, and so for anybody, and by the way, who like doesn't really know what it's like for to live in these other communities where it is more difficult to vote. Your experience of, well, I just walk in, I come in, I vote, and I'm out in 10 minutes. What are you talking about? Or I'm out in 5 minutes. What are you guys talking about? Voter suppression. That doesn't exist here. It's really easy. No, it's not. And those people need to get exposed to what the actual facts are. But that ignorance, of course, is one reason that we don't have a lot of progress on this issue. Okay. Coro says, as far as I know, Canada has no problem with long lineups. There are voting stations everywhere. Okay. Anyway, all right. So let's move on. Let's just go to let's rip the Band-Aid off. All right. All right. On Tuesday, 6 states voted in the second voting contest between just Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. So this is when it became a real two-person race. Now, the result, unfortunately, was not good for Senator Bernie Sanders. Now, Idaho, Michigan, Missouri, Mississippi, North Dakota, and Washington State all had voted, and there was a significant number of delegates at stake, and it appears that Biden did very well. Now, in Michigan, which I do believe is a must-win, Biden won it handily by a 53 to 36% margin. Now, it's funny because a lot of the areas that Bernie Sanders had carried back in 2016, rural areas mainly, ended up going to Joe Biden. So there's a lot of talk about whether, why it went to Bernie Sanders originally was very strong anti-Clinton bias, right? So I don't know if that's true, but maybe it is, and maybe that contributed to that significant loss. Now, that's with 100% reporting, by the way, so no more is going to come in from Michigan. In Missouri, Biden got 60%. Mississippi, he was at 81%. That's the percentage of the vote that he received. Won handily. So those are pretty massive numbers. In Idaho, it's a bit closer. Sanders lost to Biden by 6%, 49-43, with 100% reporting. Now, Washington State, that's more interesting. In Washington State, it's about a statistical tie. Bernie Sanders has a couple of thousand vote lead. And so very likely the delegates in Washington State are going to be split right down the middle. Now, the victory, of course, with Bernie Sanders actually won North Dakota with by about 13%. He got 53% of the vote compared to Biden's 40%. And so now that was North Dakota caucus. So not the greatest night. So you had a larger share of delegates ended up going to Joe Biden. And look, to be honest, that does make it a little bit more difficult for Bernie to catch up electorally. So now, when you look at the delegate math, right? Bernie has he's about 140 or so delegates behind, and there's still actually a lot of delegates left to go. And Sunday there's going to be a debate. Now the debate is going to be a special sit-down debate where audience members are going to ask questions. So they changed the debate format. There's a lot of questions about that. Why they changed the debate format? Why they're allowing? Why does Biden need to sit down? Why can't he stand for 2 hours? Bernie Sanders can stand for 2 hours. Why can't Biden stand for 2 hours? Why can't he answer questions? Why are they shifting the tone of the debate? Look, those are interesting questions, right? Now, related to that, you already had Jim Clyburn, right? And you also had James Carville come out and say, well, that's it, wrap the whole thing up. We don't need to have any debates. Bernie, drop out. Bernie, drop out immediately, right? Oh, you lost Michigan. Bernie, drop out. Well, again, he's behind 140 delegates. Now, look, to be fair, this is a very hard hill, right, to climb back up for Bernie Sanders. And I'm going to be honest with you, the polling does not look great. But Bernie Sanders, even in Michigan, outperformed the polls. They had him up. They had some polls with Biden up by 30 to 40 points. So he did outperform the polls in some of the places. But yeah, it is pretty difficult looking forward. And again, I got to be honest with you guys. Now, what's interesting is we're still having the debate. By the way, there's actually no audience for this new debate. So I don't know how they're going to take audience questions because of CV19. So they say. But there is going to be a debate. And depending on how many people watch, especially in states that haven't voted yet, if they see that Joe Biden cannot cogently or coherently answer questions for 2 hours and generally makes himself look really bad. I mean, and I don't mean bad as in, oh, he makes gaffes and says something stupid. No, I mean, he shows people that maybe he might not be mentally cut out for taking on Donald Trump. Well, that might change people's minds in some of these remaining states. So I don't know. That largely would depend on if the media. Well, it doesn't even matter so much if the media covers it, because that's going to be really hard to ignore when you're watching it in real time. And so that could be. I mean, that could be the difference, right? But look, there's a possible path. It is a very difficult path, but I wouldn't give up hope just yet. We should still continue to vote, to knock on doors, to call Bernie Sanders. He's going to still continue to run in the race. He's still going to get as many delegates as he can. And the more we get, by the way, even if we don't win, the more delegates we get, the more leverage we have going forward. So that could lead to maybe some possible cabinet picks, etc. That's if Bernie Sanders does not win. And again, if voters start to realize that Biden's not up to the task, that he has some serious cognitive issues, as we've been pointing out in the show, that we've noticed, well, I mean, again, that could be the difference. So it makes sense that he stays in at least for another at least we'll have to see what happens on Tuesday, next Tuesday, when another round of states votes. So, all right, now, anyway, um, so going forward, like I said, get as many delegates, get as many wins as you can, and then use that for leverage. Because believe it or not, progressive policy positions are popular with the Democratic base, as I pointed out in polls before. And so this actually sets up a good future in the long run. And what we should be doing is looking at the long run, right? So, for example, one advantage the progressive movement has always had is the youth, right? Now, I know that a lot of people are dismissing the youth right now. Oh, they didn't show up, etc. Even though they broke hugely for Bernie Sanders. And let me give you some of the polling, by the way, on this, right? So you had, according to exit polls, Bernie Sanders doing very, very well with younger people. Michigan, Sanders got 83% of the 18 to 24-year-old vote, 81% of 25 to 29-year-olds, 62% of the 30 to 39 age group. That's my age group. And then, of course, it trailed off till there, or I'm sorry, from there. Biden ended up getting 73% of the 65 plus age group. So look, that is a huge divide. It shows that the fight is generational. You have those older voters, not all of them, obviously. There's some great older progressives that are 65 plus, and not at all trying to erase them. But generally, what you have here is a very large block of older 65-year-old plus voters who went for Joe Biden, who broke for Biden, and they generally tend to be more reliable for turnout. Now, that's not to say that, oh my God, it's those lazy young people. They didn't get out the vote, and so that's why we lose. No, we're not going that route, right? No. Here's the thing. A lot of younger voters don't have the ability to wait in line for 6-7 hours to vote. College students. There's a lot of voter disenfranchisement going on, obviously, but also voter suppression and college campuses. Closing polling places, making it more difficult for younger people to vote. And so, I mean, that is a huge barrier. Also, the fact that it's on a work day and that it's not a voter holiday. People who are retired obviously have a lot more of a easier time being able to go to the polls than someone who is, juggling two jobs in a college course. And so that is one of those things, right? But look, this huge fight, and another reason that there is such a big intergenerational divide, I think it's because cable news. I mean, that is one gigantic factor. You have a lot of older voters that still watch cable TV and get their news from Fox, MSNBC, CNN, right? And here's the thing. A lot of the voters, Democratic voters, big majority, even people who are 65 or older, it's not that they're more conservative. Yes, they are more set in their ways, but they might agree with Bernie Sanders on issues. However, the mainstream media continues to pound the narrative of, yeah, but Bernie Sanders can't win. He can't win. He can't figure out ways to pay for it, which, again, they report disingenuously because it actually is explained in great detail how to pay for it, but nobody covers it in mainstream media. Nobody talks about, no, this is actually how you pay for it. No, the people that are doing that are independent outlets like us, right? Independent outlets who go over these, and they're not exactly sexy topics. I understand that, but we explain in great detail how these positions and how these policies are paid for. You don't see that kind of breakdown on cable news. And so that question of how are we going to pay for it? How are we going to pay for it? I like this plan. I want to move to universal health care, but Bernie Sanders does not have a realistic path to get there. And he doesn't show us this very simple things of how to pay for it. No, it's because those people watch cable news, and they will not explain it because well, let's be honest, a lot of the commercials on cable news are from pharmaceutical companies and health insurers. I mean, it's very simple. All you have to do is follow the money. Okay. And so, again, that message of, right, but he can't, I like him, but he can't win. He can't win. He can't win has basically been pounded into the heads of cable news viewers every day. And I've showed you examples. Chris Matthews, when he was still at MSNBC, and that wasn't too long ago, was constantly attacking Bernie Sanders. Joanne Reed constantly attacked Bernie Sanders. And so there is that message from just about every single cable news host that the guy can't win. He can't win. He's not going to beat Trump. And that, of course, right now is the number one priority of Democratic voters. As much as we disagree with it, that's a fact. They generally, yes, they care about policy, but policy is second to getting electoral wins. Now, I think it should be like one of these things that I don't get like the disconnect on is that, well, look, we have to keep voting for moderate politicians in order to win, and then we can work on policy later. But that never comes to fruition, because what you have is when you have a moderate centrist win, then they go, well, we have to get a majority in Congress now, so we can't go progressive and we can't put up progressive policy. So we have to be moderate in order to appeal to Republicans or moderate voters. And so we can't be too progressive, right? But once we win, then we can start working on progressive policy. Okay, but then, I mean, it's a continuous game of Lucy with the football, right? Oh no, we just need to do this, and then we can do progressive policy. We've got to defend the ACA. We can't push for Medicare for all. We have to defend Obamacare from the Republicans, and we have to make sure the Republicans don't take back Congress. We defended the Senate, we took over the House now, but we can't do progressive policy because we have to make sure to win the Senate, and we had lost the White House, et cetera. Look, it's just this constant game of moving the goalposts, right? And so this is the issue, right? And this is mainly pushed by cable news. And so this is the most insurmountable, I think, like wall that we hit, right? Is disinformation by bad faith actors in mainstream media. It is on purpose. It is malicious. It is deliberate. And they don't want us to have progressive policy. And so they don't inform people about progressive policy and about people who are pushing that progressive policy. There is a constant lie, a bunch of misinformation. And there's also a lot of gaslighting that goes on as well. And so that is the one thing that we have to overcome is media bias against progressives and policy, right? So now, that said, while a lot of older voters tend to watch cable news, younger voters don't. In fact, what you have is people that generally go online and they question narratives and they follow the money. And so while we on independent media do have limited reach and cable news has billions of dollars, we've got young people. And so hopefully that is something that will help us overcome that block. Now, here's the thing. If Bernie Sanders doesn't win this nomination process, right? And as I mentioned before, he intends to continue fighting, right? The policies will eventually win. Even if we get Biden and Trump, it will only delay progress, but not stop progress. For example, exit polls have showed that a majority of Democratic voters support progressive policies, right? Now, 57% of voters in Michigan say that they favor a government plan for all instead of private insurance. That is the Sanders position. 37% oppose the Sanders position. In Missouri, 59% favor the government plan. Mississippi, 60% favor the government plan. Mississippi. And look, I talked about the other states that have similar exit polls, where you have Texas, for example. Texas Democrats, 63% said, yes, let's get rid of private insurance and let's go to a government-funded health insurance system. Democratic voters want these policies. And it gets better. Exit polls in several states also asked another question. And this is a thorny question, right? This is something that you would think Americans generally wouldn't support. But it's actually really close. Does the economic system of the United States work well as it is, need minor changes, or a complete overhaul? And so, I mean, there's the question right there. In Michigan, 44% favored complete overhaul. That is, in their words, a statistical tie with 47% who favored minor changes. So there is no question among voters that there needs to be change, whether it is radical change, in which 44%, or, not just radical change, complete overhaul, 44% said, absolutely, sign me up to that. Whereas 47% said, well, we just need some tweaks. Interesting. In Missouri, complete overhaul won by 48%, over 43%. So it's even more when it comes to Missouri voters. This shows that the ideas espoused by Bernie Sanders are ascendant. Even if he loses, right, the movement carries on. And that's the thing. Now, progress, look, I think we should stop focusing so much on electoral politics. I know that's a weird thing for me to say, since I focus a lot on electoral politics, but in reality, there's so much outside of just voting, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't. I'm saying you absolutely should, but there are other avenues outside, taking to the streets, pushing for those policy positions outside of just voting. And I think a lot of people make the mistake of saying, well, voting is all that I need to do. No, there's plenty of more that you can do outside to push these policies and politicians. And so outside of that, there's a lot of energy for change. Now, again, progress can be slowed electorally, but it can't be stopped. And so we should continue to push our agenda outside of that system. And let me just leave you with this too. While it seems like we lost big yesterday, don't despair, because look, as you've seen, we have the youth, right? Younger people who don't follow the mainstream narrative, who don't watch cable news, who actually get informed about the issues from watching independent media. And you also have a majority of not only Democrats, but Americans favoring these policies. It is only a matter of time before progressive change wins out, as it always does. Keep fighting the fight, keep pushing outside of the electoral system as well as inside, and we will get that change. Okay. Moving on here. Bernie Sanders and progressives get a lot of criticism when we point out that the media often treats us and him unfairly. Now, look, we get called conspiracy theorists. We get compared to Donald Trump. However, there's a new study out there that actually proves there is a media bias against progressives. Now, according to a recent study by In These Times, CNN has portrayed Bernie Sanders more negative than Joe Biden. I know, shocker, right? But look, we already knew this. This isn't coming as a surprise to a lot of you guys that are watching, a lot of people that watch independent media. But for those who watch CNN, for those who watch cable news, well, I mean, it's a complete shock. They wouldn't know it because, again, they're in that media bubble. So now let me give you some details about this, right? So now, in the 24 hours following the win in Nevada, Sanders received 3.26 times the proportion of negative CNN coverage than Biden did following the latter's South Carolina win. Now, those two wins were by very similar margins. Now, they found that CNN's coverage of Sanders was slightly more negative than positive, receiving 32 positive mentions, 33 negative mentions, and 354 neutral mentions from CNN guests or hosts. So that's 33 negative, 32 positive, and a whole ton of neutral, right? So now, let's go to Biden. In contrast, during the 24 hours following Biden's big win in South Carolina, bringing in 48.4% compared to Sanders' 19.9%, so it was a blowout win, but roughly the same as the Nevada win. Biden received much more positive coverage from CNN, 19 positive mentions compared to only 6 negative mentions, and only about 224 neutral mentions. So understand that Biden got covered a lot less. So, but that's after South Carolina, where he had staged a huge victory and basically said, okay, now I'm on the path to comeback, right? And it proved to be a gigantic comeback leading into Super Tuesday, and where everything changed. The entire scope of the race changed. In fact, it was one of the biggest turnarounds in electoral history. It really is quite amazing when you look at the numbers, but also disastrous for all of us. Okay, but anyway, so now he wasn't covered as much, but when he was, it was massively positive. Now, a larger share, as I mentioned, Sanders mentions on cable news were very negative. Sanders, again, received more coverage, 419 mentions to Biden's 249, but again, were massively negative. So they talked about Biden less in a more positive light and talked about Bernie more, but in a negative light. So now this is important because the media sets a narrative. Now, that narrative helps determine what candidates are viable or have momentum or seem more presidential. Not only that, but a lot of voters prior to the voting on Super Tuesday and Mini Tuesday, which we had just had, a lot of voters were undecided up until the very end. Look, in our bubble, we've got, our camp, right? And then the Biden camp. And in the middle, we've got a lot of people floating around, waiting until kind of the last minute to make a decision. They're undecided. You see a positive media narrative about Joe Biden, for example, or conversely, a very negative media narrative about Bernie Sanders, basically saying, oh, well, yeah, he can't win. He can't beat Trump. He can't create a coalition. Well, then at the end, people are going to go, well, I want to vote for the guy who wins because I want to get rid of Donald Trump. And that's when you have that media narrative shaping a result. So you have that negative media coverage really shaping the momentum of a campaign. And so, but it can also elevate a campaign as well, as we saw by the very positive coverage that we saw after the South Carolina win and the endorsements of Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, etc., and Michael Bloomberg. Now, again, we saw that in effect. We saw that in action when it came to Super Tuesday. For people who watch TV, Biden is it. Suddenly he's the thing, right? Despite the poor numbers before, despite having some clear cognitive issues, and even terrible debate performances. I mean, but the media doesn't talk about any of those issues, by the way. They just talk about the horse race. But when they talk about Sanders, and I'm going to give you some examples of this, of course, it's going to be very negative. Now, according to this report, 12 of the negative mentions Sanders received following a Nevada win either accused him of being too far left to win or denounced him as a socialist. Which, by the way, you say, well, socialist, right? Well, he calls himself a socialist, right? And so naturally, the Republicans and everybody's going to call him a socialist because he's a socialist, right? And socialists can't win in America. You know who also gets called a socialist? Every single Democrat that ever ran. I'm serious. That is their go-to. Oh, he's a socialist communist, obviously. Obama, you remember Obama? Obama was a socialist. He was communist. And a secret Kenyan Muslim from Kenya. So that hates America. So look, that label, it's ridiculous to say that it doesn't have but the thing is that there is an effect though. And so and this effect was on mainly older voters, not because they disagree and say, oh, I hate the socialism, or I hate his policies. But again, it's one of those things of, yeah, but media keeps telling me that socialist people who identify as socialists, they can't win. So I can't vote for somebody, even if I like their policy. And so it is fascinating and infuriating all at the same time. But there's more examples here. On the February 23rd episode of Newsroom, James Clyburn, Democratic House Majority Whip, said on this Super Tuesday, people are concerned about this whole self-proclaimed Democratic socialist. That same 24-hour period, 6 negative mentions denigrated Sanders' candidacy by tying him to Russiagate, or suggesting that the Russian government prefers him as a candidate. On the February 23rd episode of State of the Union, former Reagan administration official Linda Chavez said, quote, but the real problem is the winner last night, I believe, was Putin. I mean, we are going to have the most divisive election if Bernie is the nominee. We're going to see two very, very angry people representing two very different extremes of their parties. And I think that helps make America more chaotic. It makes us more divisive. And I think the one that gets advantaged by that is Russia. So that's what you saw on CNN. If you watch CNN, all you would see, and MSNBC, people talking about how, well, obviously Bernie Sanders, Russia, Putin, we shouldn't vote for him, socialist, not electable. It really doesn't have an impact, or really does have an impact in changing people's minds. In fact, the 14 criticisms were about electability. Even Biden, who was interviewed on CNN, talked about Sanders' electability, right? However, CNN didn't ask Sanders about Biden's electability, even when he was down in the polls, right? Because he wasn't interviewed after Bernie Sanders' Nevada win, nor was he invited to comment on Biden's win in South Carolina. Biden's negative coverage, however, because again, there was some, differed greatly from Bernie's coverage. Now, they focused on inadequacies like raising money or challenges in his campaign, or even some of the competition from some of the other so-called moderate candidates or conservative Democrats. They also talked about his need to be more inspirational. Right. And there's great examples of those. But look, from what you see in this, and again, if you pay attention to the media, as I do, and according to these studies, that there is a gigantically clear bias against Bernie Sanders and progressives. Now, I'm not saying like, oh no, you have to cheerlead for Bernie Sanders or else you're biased against him. No. The Bernie Sanders campaign has had a lot of issues as well. Look, I've heard some people working in South Carolina that state was not handled very well, right? They were not given enough resources or enough focus, and that could have contributed to Biden's blowout in that state. But they don't talk about those issues on cable news. No, they frame the issue as Bernie has no black support. They're all Bernie bros, racist, terrible, etc. Right? But that's not at all true. And of course, there's another study that looked at Bernie Sanders' Twitter supporters versus supporters of other candidates and found that roughly about 2 to 3% were negative on Twitter. They had talked negatively about other candidates. Thing is, That's about the same amount of people who were negative on Twitter towards other, supporters of other candidates or other candidates that supported other candidates than Bernie Sanders. And so, I mean, there is one difference though. Bernie Sanders has a lot more online support. So maybe it could seem like there's more Bernie supporters on Twitter that are being negative, when in reality, it's roughly about the same. But all you hear from mainstream news, CNN, MSNBC, is mean Bernie bros, socialism, Putin, Russia, too far left, can't win. And again, CNN, but MSNBC is far, far worse. I've noticed somehow that Fox News is kinder to Bernie Sanders than the supposed progressive networks. And it's because, look, I think he presents an existential threat to mainstream media, to corporate media as a business entity, right? He's causing all sorts of problems for our profits. We can't have that. Our advertisers, well, they're in oil and gas, they're in the pharmaceutical industry, they pay for ads on our network. And if you end money in politics, well, then that's going to be a significant amount of our revenue we lose every election cycle. So we are locked into this because corporate media, has a monetary incentive to keep things status quo. So now, here's the interesting thing, though, about CNN and the rest of the media, by the way. I think that if Biden becomes the nominee and he continues his cognitive decline, which is very obvious, then as soon as Bernie Sanders is considered out, right, gone, they're going to pivot to covering Biden's cognitive issues nonstop. It's the irony, right? It's good ratings. And so you're going to have good ratings with Donald Trump, which is good for the media, and you're going to have good ratings talking about how Republicans are going after Biden because his brain is melting in real time. So that's what we have to look forward to. And it's because they're going to say that, well, the Republicans are talking about it, so we have to talk about it. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And so mainstream media, look, they've already joined in. They've already picked a side. They've had a side. And it's not the progressive side. And so I'm afraid that with the media's assistance, we're going to end up with Biden being the nominee and Donald Trump winning another 4 more years. All right. Moving on here. So let's switch gears. All right. The Trump administration is now strongly considering a bailout. For who? The oil and gas industry. Because of course, right? Now, this is according to the Washington Post. White House officials, alarmed at the prospect that numerous shale companies, many of them deep in debt, could be driven out of business if downturn in oil prices turns into a prolonged crisis or continues to be prolonged, that, they could, they could go out of business, and that's not good. So they have a solution. Now, as I mentioned, that solution is bailouts. So now, before we get into more details about that, I want to talk about what precipitated this. Simply put, you had low interest rates that were, put forward by the Fed, as Donald Trump has continued to pressure the Fed to continue to cut interest rates, keep them low. Well, since there was low interest rates, these corporations decided to borrow a whole lot of money. They over leveraged themselves. Now, that means basically that they couldn't pay back those loans that they had borrowed, right? Especially if the market took a dive. So now, what a lot of people don't know is that corporate debt is actually one of the next biggest bubbles, right? Now, back in 2007, 2008, mortgage prices, home prices were the bubble. Now it's corporate debt. These corporations, because of all this low interest rates, they have been borrowing money and borrowing money. And then the same banks that will loan them the money, they'll then collateralize it, put it into packages, and sell them as derivatives and even start to bet against them. So, I mean, disastrous, right? So now you had COVID-19, which caused gigantic drops in the stock market. And then you had the Saudi Arabian government refusing to deal with the OPEC, cutting prices, increasing production. Well, now the price of oil has dropped. And now, simply put, these corporations are in big trouble. If they continue to lose this money, then they will not be able to pay back their loans. And so now that's a really simplistic way of putting the problem, right? It's actually a lot more complex. It's involved. And you've got futures and derivative markets, and you've got lending, you've got interest rates, et cetera, right? But they're in trouble. They're in trouble. We're in trouble. Not good, very bad, as Michael Burks would put it. So the Trump administration is planning to bail them out of their own mess that they put themselves into by borrowing more money than they can actually pay back by, and this is the genius idea, lending them more money at low interest rates. Now, the Post reports that the federal assistance is likely to take the form of low-interest government loans to the shale companies, whose lines of credit to major financial institutions have been choked off. Oh, goody. So we're going to pay off low-interest debt with more low-interest debt. Because, that is totally sustainable and actually puts us, taxpayers, on the hook. Now, we're on the hook instead of the banks, which would fail, right? If they don't get the money that they loaned out to these companies would fail, right? And you've got this entire house of cards that's basically ready to fall over and take us into a recession. So that's a disaster. I mean, this is a collapse that is coming. That is basically here. And so the Trump administration, bailing out oil companies with more loans, with more debt on the taxpayers' side. The reaction to it, the announcement of this plan was not good. In fact, I've got some responses here. Mike Gillette says, so, socialism, but only for billionaires. Now remember, this is at a time where 45 to 68,000 people a year die from lack of health care, right? And we can't get Medicare for all, but Trump can bail out the oil companies, the shale companies, right? Lolo says, as usual, corporations are more important than people. Oh, wait, the Supreme Court said corporations are people, right? As did Mitt Romney. Need I remind you, right? J. Lane Wood says, the U.S. Treasury is like a big giveaway box for every rich person and corporation in the country. That is entirely true, sadly so. Now, Congressman Ed Markey also said something about this. They said the White House is proposing to bail out the fossil fuel industry. We need more CV-19 testing, not more fracking. We should be working to pass a Green New Deal and deliver climate justice, not delivering an unjust payout to Trump's billionaire oil and gas cronies. Now, this isn't the first time, of course, the Trump administration has tried to not just bail out, but more prop up the fossil fuel industry. He tried doing it with coal, and it didn't work. Coal is a dying industry. But now you have shale, also a dying industry. By the way, we wouldn't be in this mess if we had, in renewable energy. We focused completely on renewables, solar, wind, and geothermal, right? That kind of stuff. Instead, no, double down. And then, by the way, these companies will go get themselves into more debt and then expect us to bail them out. Of course, right? Now, Food and Water Watch says after one of his billionaire friends lost big money yesterday, Trump is now preparing to bail out fracking companies affected by dropping oil prices. This is outrageous, especially on the heels of cuts to food stamps and the EPA. Eric Holhaus says, this is it. This is what I was worried about. And now it's happening. The Trump administration is more worried about bailing out oil industry tycoons than saving the lives of its citizens. That is absolutely true. But again, we told you about that. We knew that was going to happen. All right. And then Jared Yates Sexton says, yes, the people who need help and relief in this global pandemic are the shale companies that just happen to be owned by some of Donald Trump's closest friends. Forget tests and healthcare and assistance to people losing their jobs and lives. Shale. But if we don't help them, some people will argue, we'll lose jobs. We're going to lose jobs in the fracking industry. You know what's funny? I'm actually kind of tired of people's lives and livelihoods being held hostage by irresponsible corporate boards. And so it is interesting to hear that that argument, right? We're going to lose jobs. People are going to lose their jobs if we don't give this corporation free money. Great. Look, you guys knew you over-leveraged on those loans. Why don't you just practice some fiscal responsibility and pull yourself up by your own bootstraps instead of asking for the government to subsidize you? Stop relying on big government oil companies. I mean, it is really fun to turn their own bullshit against them. But look, to be honest, this is a serious problem that these companies under Trump and the Republicans and corporate Democrats will bail them out. But at the same time, there will very likely be workers who lose their jobs as a result, and there is no bailout for them. I mean, we are still recovering from the last corporate recession when Wall Street did the same thing with mortgage-backed securities. And we as a society have learned nothing. Actually, no, scratch that. We have learned something. At least these people on Wall Street have. They learned that no matter what they do, the government, under a Democrat or Republican, will provide billions of dollars in taxpayer money for relief. Because, face it, our country is owned by the corporations. And maybe, just maybe it's about time we take it back. All right. So that's enough angry here. Let's move on. Actually, you know what? Before we do, we have a super chat here that I want to read. Also, let's see. Star Trek says, I have an elderly mother who gets care at home. I live in the sticks of Georgia. Very worried. I'm 60 and she's 90. COVID-19 worries. Yeah, no, you're absolutely the most at risk. And so do what you can to stay safe. Follow CDC recommendations, and I hope everything is okay. And so, I mean, thank you. And again, like, I'm gonna send all the positive thoughts I can towards you and your mother. So, all right. That's it. Let's go to let's try to have some fun. I know it's tough, but let's make fun of Alex Jones. All right. Conspiracy theorist Alex Jones was arrested for drunk driving. Oh, interesting. Oh, no, not drunk driving. Driving while impaired. We believe in facts here, unlike InfoWars. Okay. Anyway, so now this is according to a report by the Daily Beast's Will Sommer. Jones was arrested on a Class B misdemeanor DWI charge, according to a spokeswoman for the Travis County Sheriff's Department. Now, according to an arrest affidavit filed in court, Jones was having an argument with his wife, and so she had called the sheriff's department to report a family disturbance between her and Jones. Now, Jones' wife added that he had possibly been drinking. Possibly. Okay, now, the affidavit reads, the disturbance now was only verbal, but earlier in the day it was physical. Now, okay, so look, there was this police report, right? Later in the day, I'm sorry, not later in the day, on the way to check out this disturbance, right? A sheriff's deputy saw a car matching the description of Jones' car, and they decided, okay, let's pull them over, right? And you're not going to be shocked to find out that the police officer said that Jones had a, quote, strong odor of alcohol coming from his person. Now, the affidavit noted that Jones said he had drank a bottle of sake earlier that night during dinner when they were having this domestic disturbance, right? Now, an article on the InfoWars website, however, claims something a little bit different. They claim that Jones was caught up in a Travis County DWI dragnet after being pulled over for speeding. Well, no, wait a minute. No, it's the dragnet. Yep, they were pulling over for speeding, and he had a little bit of sake, and he wasn't even over the legal limit. But they still got him. Dragnet, deep state, they're after me. Now, in the story, Jones says he had drank a small amount of sake at a Japanese restaurant. Now, look, it's Alex Jones, so I don't believe a damn word he says. But the report described, and I love this description here, Jones' eyes as water and glassy with constricted pupils, and adds that he was excited, talkative, and carefree. Well, that sounds like he's having a fun time. Now, Jones also had swayed back and forth during an interview, according to the affidavit, and later failed a walk-and-turn sobriety test. Not only that, but it also showed that he was actually under the legal limit of 0.08 blood alcohol content, but was just barely. So this was like a rounding issue, right? The test recorded him at a 0.079, putting him 1/100th below the limit, technically. So technically under the limit, but according to Texas law, you may be close, but no cigar. It allows for a driver to be charged with a DWI, even if they're under the limit, if they're considered to be impaired. Now, remember the description. Let's go back to that. Glassy-eyed, or water and glassy-eyed, right? With constricted pupils, couldn't pass a walk-and-turn sobriety test. So, look, that would appear to have him be impaired. The DWI seems a bit legit, right? So no deep states, no dragnets, no they're out to get me and for turning the frogs gay, and 1776 will not come again. Okay? Very impaired. Look, here's the thing. I have come to the realization that Alex Jones is the guy that no one wants to party with. And let's be honest about that, right? He's a guy who gets ripped, starts screaming nonsense, and tries to pick fights. Yeah, I mean, based on what his ex-wife had talked about, and I know I hate getting into people's personal lives, but like she had made a lot of allegations which seem to be matching up, that he has a bit of an alcohol problem, right? And look, that description, by the way, getting ripped, screaming nonsense, and trying to pick fights with people, that could be used as a description of a show. I mean, that's the entire premise. So he sounds like one of the worst drunks ever, right? One of those people who just gets completely obliterated and then starts, causing troubles. All right, well, for me, look, I've been drunk before. Not on this show, obviously. But like, I'm fun, right? I'm one of the fun ones, right? But we all know the guy who isn't fun. Jones is that guy. Not a fun guy to have a beer with. Okay. Um, I don't understand how people like Joe Rogan can be friends with Alex Jones. Then again, Joe Rogan probably just smokes pot with him. So, I mean, there is that. But look, I think he does have a serious problem. Might have a problem. Might have a serious problem, or maybe more than one problem. I don't know. But this isn't the first time he's gotten in trouble with law for drinking and driving. Back in December, the New York Times talked to a former InfoWars staffer who described Jones driving while drinking out of a Dixie cup that had the quote smell of vodka like paint thinner. I'm not saying anything, but just wow. Who would have thought that an online crazy personality would also be an alleged drunk? Who knew? The things that you learn. But I'm sure all of this is a conspiracy, that I am a paid Soros actor employed by the deep state that is also trying to turn your cat gay. And maybe your dog too. So, all right. That's it. Look, that's all the time I got for you guys today. Thank you for going around the nation with me. Please like and share. Please consider becoming a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. We need your help more than ever. Because again, we're not going to win the media war, right? We're not going to be able to reach new people, get people deprogrammed from CNN and MSNBC and their, lies and their gaslighting without support. We need your help, man. We've got to stay strong in this. And look, think about it this way. You don't have us. You don't have Humanist Report. You don't have Secular Talk. You don't have any of those. What do you have? What media outlet is going to fight for you? Like, the only thing that we have is each other. And if we continue to prop each other up, you help us and we get out the message for you and we inform you and we give you avenues to fight back. That's what we need to do if we're ever going to have any sort of victory. And so patreon.com/TYTNation, or become a channel member, and help us continue to fight, keep up the fight, and help us remain sustainable. All right. Thank you guys. Love you. And remember, change begins with you. Good night, nation. See you guys later.